Yo guys, welcome to Shine Gaming. Today we're going to be looking at the new champion Lilia, who's coming into League soon. We're going to be going through her abilities and some tips on each of them, as well as combos and more, so stay tuned. Her passive Dream Laden Bow means every time you use any of your abilities on an enemy, whether it's a champion or a minion or a jungle monster, you apply 5% of their max health as magic damage over 3 seconds. So if we look at this, the Teemo dummy, if we use this, you can see there's an icon above the head, which means they're taking max health damage. And you can use this with different abilities. They don't stack, so you can't keep spamming some abilities and hoping it kind of doubles the damage dealt every second. And you also can't reset the timer by auto attacking, which makes sense because it's something that only activates using an ability. So this will be really effective against tanks who have loads of health. Now, just talking about the passive part of Blooming Blows, which is her Q first, any ability you use that hits an enemy will give you a bonus movement speed. So if we look right now, we have 330, and as soon as we use our Q, we have 354, and this stacks 5 times. So if we use another ability, it goes to 377. The movement speed that you get isn't decaying, so it's a constant movement speed. And once you're at 5 stacks or any stacks lower than 5, after the 5 seconds that you have the movement speed passes, it rapidly decays, so every second you lose a stack. But you can obviously come back to where you were before by using abilities again. So obviously if you're in the jungle and before you're going for a gank, you can use your abilities to get to the 5 stacks and then suddenly roam away into the lane to do a gank. The active of her Q, Blooming Blows, deals damage in a circle, as you can see there. And you might be wondering, why is there 2 circles? Where the closest circle deals magic damage, and the outer circle, in addition to the magic damage, also does the same amount of damage but as true damage. So if we look at this Rift Scuttler, right now it's got 1360 health. If we use it very close up, that health will drop down to 1294. But now if we use the ability from the outer edge like this, we can see the health drops even further to 1247. So just as a reminder, because it's good to get into the habit of realizing the new things with this champion, as soon as I use my Q, there are 2 additional things going on. Each of them are taking damage over 3 seconds, and I'm also getting a boost of movement speed for 5 seconds. Her W, which is called Watch Out, Chip, basically deals a lot of magic damage in the circle that you can see on the cursor, and if you're right in the middle of this circle, it deals significantly more magic damage. So if we look at this poor Teemo dummy, if we just use it over here, we can see the total damage after, you know, the runes that we have, and the passive 3 seconds of damage is 213. But if we use it on the absolute center for this poor Teemo, then the damage is significantly more at, basically almost 400. Now obviously you want some sort of CC before using this, because you always want to try and get the absolute center, and this is where our E Swell Seed comes in. Some additional information regarding the W: it doesn't matter where you do it, whether it's close up or at the very edge, it will always take around 1 second to wind up the ability. So if we click at the edge, it's 0, 1, and if we do it very close up, 0, 1. And you can't dash over terrain, which is very sad, so you can't do this and suddenly end up over the other side. So you won't be able to steal Drake if it happens to be this close to the wall, and yeah, that just won't work. So her E ability, Swell Seed, is a really interesting one. You lob a Swell Seed, and essentially if it doesn't hit an enemy champion, it keeps going until it collides with the terrain. So this can be as far as you want it to be. It can be like here, and it'll just keep going. And as you can see, there's a little icon showing you where it's going to hit. So if we do it from here and just shoot this way, let's try to predict where it's going to go. Let's see where the icon is. There it is. So eventually, one day after millions of years, it will eventually reach. Now it stops moving once it collides, so if you use it immediately here on an enemy, it will just stop moving. But obviously you can use it like this and it will stop when it hits. What it actually does to the enemy is it deals magic damage, slows them for 3 seconds, and reveals them. So in case you're wondering, this doesn't actually give you vision, as you've seen earlier. It will stay dark, the map, but obviously if it does hit an enemy, then you'll reveal them. As we can see over here, where we know there's an enemy in the darkness, and we can see around them. And be careful, you can actually shoot it past them and it'll never hit them like this. So in some sense, you could clearly imagine there one day being a skin for volleyball, and you can lob this over the walls as well. So you can get an enemy Lilia as well on this side, and you can just have a fun game of volleyball. That would be pretty cool if there was a champion that can actually interact with this and knock it back. like maybe a new game mode. So obviously this slow will really help when you're trying to land your W, to make sure you hit the center like that. So just as an example of what we would do if we're in the jungle and want to prepare for a gank, we would use our abilities, try to get the 5 stacks of the movement speed, and then once we have done that and we think we are ready to rumble, let's say right now we just have 4, we want to save our abilities for the actual fight, so we're going to run as fast as we can, lop that over so we can slow them down a bit, use our Q and attack them, damage them, and yes, hopefully get a kill. So I really like her ultimate, Lilting Lullaby. Originally I thought it was called Tilting Lullaby. I mean, the ult is kind of OP, so it could get the enemy tilted, which is always a good thing. But essentially, remember how every ability applies the passive, which is you're applying Dream Dust to them, which basically just deals damage over time. Basically, during those 3 seconds where Dream Dust is applied to the enemy champion, you can activate your ultimate. So we just use an ability here, and that icon's above their head, which means Dream Dust is on. You can see the ultimate then lights up, and what the ult does is, it doesn't matter how many enemy champions have Dream Dust applied to them, it will make them all drowsy for 1.5 seconds, and afterwards they fall asleep for 2 seconds. So just to show what that looks like, if I press my ult, they're drowsy, and then they're asleep where they're stunned. And they can't move, they can't do anything. They get woken up obviously after the 2 seconds, but if you deal any damage to them as well, they wake up. However, if it's periodic damage, they won't wake up, and I think what that means is, now I'm not sure if that means if there's a Karthus with their W just standing around them that they're not going to wake up. That would be pretty weird, but I think it's saying that because obviously our passive does damage over time, which is periodic damage over 3 seconds, and it takes 1.5 seconds for them to go into the sleep state. So technically there's a 1.5 second gap where you're still doing damage to the enemy because of your passive when they're supposed to be asleep. And I think it means they won't be woken up by your passive. But if I try to do an ability and immediately press R as soon as possible, it's kind of around the same time because there's a little lag between when I spam R to make it activate as soon as possible. But just so you know, you can actually do damage to the enemy just before they fall asleep. So during the drowsy state, right now they're drowsy, you can use an ability and that will be fine. It's just only during the asleep state where if you do damage, so if we wait and do it now, then they wake up early. And also if you manage to wake up the enemy during their sleep by doing damage, that damage will do additional damage as well. So I'm now going to explain a gank that we can do using our ultimate, but just so you know, I'm going to assume that we're kind of hiding in the bush here, so we can't necessarily get all of our movement speed stacks because our W and our E have quite long cooldowns and we don't really want to use them just yet. But we can stack with our Q, which is a really short cooldown, and we could use the Rift Scuttler if we're in the bush over here to try to get some stacks before we go in. So the first gank combo I want to show is where, I'll talk it through first before I show it, where you use your E first to get a slow, and while you're using your E you're running towards the enemy, and then you're pressing your ultimate because that E will obviously apply the passive to them, and then whilst they're drowsy you're using your Q first because you can do that free damage, and then once they're fully asleep you can get the perfect W on, and because you used your Q first it has time to come back from cooldown so you can use it again afterwards, and by then I think it's 4 or 5 stacks of movement speed you have, so you have enough movement speed to try to chase them as well. So I'll show that now. We're using the E first and then pressing R as quickly as possible, using our Q, and once they're asleep we can use W, and soon after we have our Q again, and we have 5 stacks after we use that second Q. Now the next combo that's probably a bit more easier to implement because you're not relying on your E, which could be a bit tricky to hit, involves, and once again I'll talk through it first before I show it, it involves basically running up to them, and obviously you could use the Predator rune for your brutes, you can use Chilling Smite, but you want to get your Q off so that you have the passive on them, and then pressing your ult. And then I was thinking, you know, during the during the phase when they're getting drowsy, they're obviously being slowed at a really fast rate. So does it make more sense to use your W or your E? And I think it makes sense to use W because obviously you can deal damage during that phase, and they're slowed enough that it should be easier to hit your W anyway. And then because of that, when you use your E during the sleep phase, that will obviously wake them up, but because you're using your E, you're actually giving them a slow for 3 seconds as well. So even though they're awake, they can't just move away really easily, they're going to be slowed, and that means you can use your second Q even more easily and get more stacks to chase them with movement speed stacks. So let me show how this works, because it must be much easier to understand like that. So first you use your Q, now you have the passive, you use your ultimate, you use your W, and then you wake them up with your E, and they'll also be slowed for 3 seconds, which means you can use your Q again more easily and chase them, because you'll have 5 stacks of movement speed as well at that point. So the final combo I wanted to talk about is probably the one that's the easiest to do and still does a lot of damage, because trying to hit the E may be difficult, or trying to hit the W might be difficult even if they're being slowed during the ultimate, during the initial drowsy phase. So to make sure we do actually hit the W right in the center, we're going to use it when they're actually stunned during the ult, so when they're asleep. So our combo is going to be Qing to get the initial passive on, then ulting, and then getting an auto attack in before the sleep phase. So instead of using one of these abilities, we're just going to do an auto attack, and then we're going to wake them up with the W, and immediately afterwards press E so that they're slowed. So we're kind of getting the same effect as the previous combo, because we're getting them to be slowed after they wake up, which is good, but we're just doing it slightly later, but we're going to try to have it as soon as possible after the W. So here it goes. We're going to Q first, then that, auto attack, and then whilst they're asleep, do that, then immediately slow them, then continue attacking. Oh wow, I had no idea Shen would do that on a dummy. That's interesting. So for those who are interested, I wanted to show what happens when you're at level 18, and this is, you know, with no items, just to compare the pure base stats of each ability. So on here in the chat, I've got the main statistics of the different abilities at level 1. So let's just compare them with what happens at level 18. So the passive stays the same, it's still dealing a 5% max health for 3 seconds. The Q's movement speed that it gives you is 11% now, so up from 7%, but it's still for 5 seconds and 5 stacks max. The damage goes up as you'd expect, with true damage still being the same ratio. The W damage goes up for outside as well as inside the main center, which would make sense. Each damage goes up, but the slow is now increased to 45%, whereas at level 1 it was 25%, but it's still for 3 seconds. And the ultimate, the drowsy period is still 1.5 seconds, but the asleep period has increased by half from 2 seconds to 3 seconds, and the additional damage when waking them up has almost doubled. Now your abilities stack with AP, as you can see from their descriptions. So the interesting one is with your Q, if you did something crazy and went full build of Ravadan's Death Caps, you would get 21% additional movement speed per stack. So obviously you're getting over 100 with those 5 stacks of movement speed. And in case you're wondering what that looks like, we've got the 5 stacks right now, and this is without boots. Some additional points I wanted to add are that if you're trying to get movement speed just in general, whether you're going to a lane or whether you're going through the jungle, your abilities do have to actually hit a target. So this hitting the wall doesn't actually give you the movement speed because it's not actually a target, and same thing with this, it does have to actually hit an enemy. But one thing you can do is, as you're moving through a lane, you could prepare this to hit, for example, over there as you keep running, so that you get the movement speed boost. This also works when you're moving through the jungle, you're trying to go mid lane, and while you're there you just want to chuck this there, gain some extra movement speed while you're running. And obviously, let's say there's a fight going on here, you want to get there as quickly as possible, you can obviously use your Q while you're there, because you can do it while you're moving, and use your E as well, get 2 stacks of movement speed. So some stuff on a more technical note. So when you apply your ult, it doesn't actually apply the passive, it only applies the passive once you wake them up from the sleep. So you can even do that with an auto attack. So if I show you this thing, okay, so over there you can see above their head, I ult now, and it's not applying there, but if I wake them up, then it goes back on their head. That's such a weird way to show it, because this Cassiopeia wants to hide under the turret. So in terms of what to max out first on your abilities, apart from the obvious ultimate, I'd go with Q first, because it's such a low cooldown and you want to maximize the damage you're doing on that, especially because you have true damage at the outer edge, and you'll increase the movement speed as well, which you get. And remember, this movement speed is a passive of the Q, so it applies to all of your abilities. I then go with W, so that the very center damage has even more damage when you're doing a full combo against an enemy. And I'd go with E last, even though the movement speed slowdown does increase as you level up E. I think going with the more damage abilities is probably a better idea. So in terms of some items that I would recommend, Rylai's will definitely help because of how quick you can spam your Q and you'll constantly be slowing them down, which is always good. Also, any type of AP AP damage item will really help, as all of your abilities scale with AP. If you're jungling, Predator Rune will help as well, just to get extra movement speed and kind of be like a Hecarim 2.0. You are a bit squishy, so maybe going Rod of Ages would help as well to get some additional health. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this video was useful and you're excited to see the new champion once it comes to live servers. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed and want to see more, and see you in the next video. Adios!